Hello and welcome to the first in a short series of episodes from the Full Force podcast, where we play each FSS figure against each other in a battle to see who is the greatest action figure the club released in the 8 waves as their figure subscription service. We are looking at each wave separately, of course, starting with FSS 1, and due to the awkward numbers that just don't really work in the playoff structure, we will be doing groups of 3 in the first round, and the mystery 13th will go up against the winner at the end. I am Christopher Battle Crapper McLeod, aka Diagnostic 80, and joining me on this and all the episodes for this particular short series are Full Force regulars. Adam worked my whole damn life trying to be an awesome artist, and people only know who I am because of this podcast, Riches. And Justin, I was so close to Brady I could have kissed him, Bell. Now let's get into... Did you actually kiss him?
Security had to drag me away, man.
Whatever. I bet you got a tongue right in there, didn't you? Before we get into round 1, Adam, you wanted to talk about some things about this particular series. Now, take us through what you planned to kind of drop on us in the knowledge department.
Yes, I thought it might be fun to kind of start every episode this way, give a little cool background on some dates and numbers of the FSS, because I find it pretty interesting. So get this. The FSS concept was announced and the first 2 figures revealed, Quarrel and Nano Bat, at JoeCon in Orlando, Florida on April 2nd, 2011.
Right.
But we wouldn't have the first figures in hand until December 19th, 2012, over a full year and a half later. And funny enough, at JoeCon 2012, figures from FSS 2 were being revealed 6 months before the first figure from FSS 1 had even shipped out. And to top that off, the cover of the December 2011 Club magazine shows all the FSS 1 figures with the caption, G.I. Joe figure subscription service is a hit, except we wouldn't even be able to order them for another 9 months after when the magazine was published. But maybe Crystal Ball wrote that headline.
That's amazing.
And just for some compare and contrast, I thought we could start each round of this with some numbers. So the order period for this subscription ran from August 10th, 2012 through September 4th, 2012. And a single subscription was priced at $351.30 shipped, or $27.02 per figure. And you'll get to watch inflation magic occur before your very eyes throughout this series.
We'll have a price league table, starting with FSS 1.
Yes, if we take value into consideration, this whole FSS wins. But but yeah, I've been looking forward to this for a while. I think it's going to be a lot of fun to revisit some of these older subscriptions with hindsight and the ability to kind of measure them up against all the figures that came later. And plus, for me, this is the only one I'll be able to do unbiased, since it's the only subscription I haven't worked on. So I can really give you the real talk here. Keep it 100. The straight dough.
Does that mean you're going to be lying for the rest of the episode?
Who knows?
I'd also like to point out that in no way have we stolen the idea from G.I. Joeberg, who I did an episode of the FSS card art battle with. This is completely different, and them if they try and sue us. I'm just kidding. Big shout out to G.I. Joeberg.
A list of foes grows. Yeah. We also know this is going to be impossibly hard for Justin, since he's contractually obligated to rate every figure as 5 stars. So Chris and I are going to be taking turns as the tiebreaker vote.
Oh, that is brilliant. Yeah. To be honest, though, this is something when you mentioned it after we did the card art battle, I was like, do you know what? That's a really good idea. But then we were back and forth on how do we do this with these really weird numbers involved. And you actually came up with the idea really early on. And I'm just like, that I can work this out. And I was trying to
and then you were like, oh wait, math.
And I was kind of looking at it going, oh, hang on. The only way it could have worked is if 2 of the like the opposing coasts, shall we say, had battled together as one. But again, it just doesn't work very nicely. So, after hammering out loads of ideas and just saying things like, maybe we could have the 13th figure and then include exclusives and in membership incentives for that year. And in the end, it was just like, no, let's just do what Adam said to do from the beginning. And yeah, so...
Yeah, I started looking at the March Madness brackets and the WWE King of the Ring bracket, and I'm like, none of this makes sense. How did they do it?
It's crazy.
Survivor Series, man. Should have done it like Survivor Series.
Oh yeah,
of course. Yeah,
perfect. We should have done table, ladders, and chairs. No rules. Anywho, let's get stuck into this because I know people are going, "Oh, stop talking, you douchebags," and just tell us your opinions on what you think the best FSS figure from FSS 1 is. So let's get into round 1. Battle. Round 1. First up, we have Cobra Dice, Kim Arashikage, and Quarrel. Let's start with Dice here, guys. Adam, take us through your thoughts of Dice as a figure first and foremost, please.
So you know that part a minute ago when I said I was going to be unbiased on this one? Well, I lied. I love Ninja Force. At the time this figure was released, I believe it was the only Ninja Force character that had been made in modern era.
Hang on, let me check. I'm kidding, I'm not going to check that.
Okay, yeah, so if I'm wrong, just edit that out. But I'm pretty sure it was. And so, of course, there was an excitement surrounding it just based on that. A lot of the figures in this set, and I'm going to try to be fair to them with this, but, they do suffer from whatever tooling was available, at the time these were constructed. Sure. I think that Dice is obviously a great character selection, and I think that given the parts available, it was about the best they could do at the time. That mask had been floating around for a while, so obviously it was Hasbro's intent to make Dice at some point, or at least let you make Dice. The only real thing that I have an issue with this figure to this day is, why does he just have an unmasked human head under that mask? Like, he has, like, actual, like, poof of hair sticking out under the mask, which is a little wonky, but I am a fan.
Yeah, Justin, what about you, bud?
Yeah, I mean, I find myself agreeing with Adam on a lot of that stuff. Actually, take that back. He gets 5 stars.
How many actually? You should have General's Joe's open so that you can tell us exactly what you put in the star rating for each one.
Oh God, that might be embarrassing. I think this is.
I want to say this is either 4 or 3.5, but it's a good one. And I have to agree, actually, Justin. Yeah. I must admit, like, agreeing with yourself and Adam on this one. In fact, you don't have to say anything at all, Justin. We'll just relay what you said on General's Joe's.
I'll just sign off and just have you read word for word what each review says.
We've got you saying 5 stars.
I approve this message.
We've got you saying 5 stars. I'll just repeat that over and over again. But seriously, like, I think the figure looked really cool. I think he looks great, and at the time I was really into him. I thought that that mask really does work just perfectly. But again, I'm kind of in the same boat as you there, Adam. Like, the head, what's the point underneath? And again, like, you're using a known character head, right? So it's like, you've already got that in a different character. But again, I really like him, and I thought he was a brilliant figure. Just did you want to embellish a bit more, Justin, before I interrupted you?
Well, yeah, I mean, I think, like Adam said, he did suffer from kind of the parts choice at the times. I really don't like, I think it was like Pursuit of Cobra Storm Shadow arms, like those funky arms with the elbows that don't bend quite enough, and wasn't a big fan of those. But the rest of the figure's about as good as could be expected, for repurposed web gear, and yeah, like you said, that bizarre poof of Elvis hair sticking out from under the mask. I don't know why they made that particular choice, but overall, I was a fan of Ninja Force back in the day. Well, Ninja Force is kind of a sore subject for me because I was big into articulation, and a lot of those Ninja Force figures actually didn't have full articulation, which kind of ticked me off back then. Yeah. But so I was happy to get an updated Dice, and I kind of used him in concert with that G.I. Joe Retaliation kind of Red Ninja sort of slice figure. So in that way, he was kind of. He kind of had a partner in crime there, but
oh yeah, I remember that with the mask that it came with, all the separate accessories and stuff.
And you had that dollar store Storm Shadow, which was kind of
Jinsu.
Sort
of... Yeah, let's keep mentioning as many other figures as we can think of, so Chris has to edit photos of all of them into this video.
Or I might just go, you guys. It's going to be the most basic video ever.
But no, yeah, my original review was 3 stars. I think that's probably pretty.
Do you know what? I would probably agree with that in general. You've done in General's Joe's. You've done well without that. Like we were talking earlier on off the podcast about the fact that it was difficult back then because you didn't have as much to use as a benchmark. So at the time, those kind of reviews, are probably are fine. But then you kind of look back and you think, actually, that probably isn't a 4-star when you compare it to this, and this. And I suppose if you've got the, the top one should cover every single base. Like, something with 5 stars needs to cover all of the bases. And And again, like with what you had at the time, yeah, that doesn't always work out. But anyway,
yeah, exactly.
Moving through to Jinx or Kim Arashikage. Back to you, Adam, on this one.
I think this is a good time to talk about retooled heads. So,
yeah.
In this FSS, we've got Kim, Agent Jinx, Arashikage, Covergirl, and Blackout, all making use of heads originally produced for a different construction of figure. And we can go through the mixed results that it had on each one. But I'll say generally I'm not a fan of that because while it can work well in some cases, like on a masked or helmeted character like Darklon, in the case of a figure like Jinx here, not so much.
Bit peanutty, isn't it?
Yeah, I think the intent was good, and we kind of have to grade FSS 1 on a bit of a curve because the whole concept was still being figured out. But on this one, it just didn't really work for me. The head sculpt doesn't feel up to the level of detail of the body, which at this point was that great 2009 Rise of Cobra era sculpt, and then coupled with the more cartoonish 2004 head sculpt, the juxtaposition is pretty jarring. But I'm just going to go ahead and steal the tidbit that I'm sure one of you would have said if I hadn't. But obviously, this was a great chance for us to get the City Strike Scarlet pieces from that unreleased figure. So.
Did. No, that's totally on point. This is the problem with when someone goes first, which Justin he'll get to go first on the next load. Gross. But at the moment, Adam's just stealing all of the good stuff.
Sloppy seconds for the rest of us.
He's got Quarrel to talk about, so gutted.
See, I actually thought, I agree with Adam on the head sculpt not being great, but I thought this figure was kind of the perfect example of what the club should try to do with the FSS, and they didn't always manage to do it successfully, where they took some inspiration from, some might argue it's kind of based on Valor versus Venom.
Yeah.
The overall look and construction. So they pulled some elements from that. I think there were some kind of Sigma 6-ish kind of elements.
You wish.
With the figure as well. Plus, like Adam said, they had the City Strike Scarlet accessories too. So the club kind of covered a bunch of bases here, made a figure that was kind of new, but still had a lot of homage to some of the older stuff, and was able to get some canceled accessories out there too. So I was really a big fan of this version of Jinx, even with the somewhat crappy reuse of the 2004 head sculpt. So, I really like this figure a lot, in spite of that, the issues with the head. And unfortunately, it didn't really seem like the club managed to, kind of find this formula for many of the rest of the FSSs. They either dove too deep into vintage inspiration or they tried to go too obscure. But I just really think it's a great example of what the FSS should be, and I was a really big fan of the figure.
This is actually a good point, because where you you kind of wanted that, I suppose, the kind of modern updates or different updates as opposed to kind of that going into the past and basically copying it. You see, I initially, I basically just want everything done. I want all those figures that we had kind of modernized in a sense. And I'm happy when I see these kind of cool modern updates, but I felt that Jinx, she kind of stands out a little bit across all of the figure subscription services for that particular reason. I'm sure we'll come across others where they've tried to do some sort of modern update. I can't think of any off the top of my head, but we'll come to those as we find them if we do find them. But for the most part, the club have stuck very religiously to that vintage styling, at least, or just kind of getting the colors in the right place, the web gear in the right place, the right color pants and that kind of stuff. So for the most part, that's their kind of forte. And of course, this being the first FSS, as you said, they were trying to find their feet, and maybe they thought, it'd be a good idea to do this. Do you think there was feedback in this particular arena where people were just like, no, we want the vintage? Is that the stronger voice in the fandom?
Well, we knew it was a hit a year before you could order it, so I mean, it's really hard to say. No, and I'm sure that obviously that the club always takes feedback into consideration, but I feel like the FSS really, even to this day, is such a tough juggling act, because you're trying to please everyone.
Yeah.
You're trying, and they're pulling from the history of not even just Real American Hero, but obviously as seen recently, even the 60s. So, they're covering a 50-year stretch of time and international. So to narrow that down to 13 figures and try and please the majority of fans, that's a really tough balance.
Are you surprised, and this is to Justin actually, are you surprised they didn't really delve into Sigma 6 much?
Part of me is, but part of me isn't, just because, I think so, because a lot of the a lot of the fans these days seem to kind of recognize and appreciate what Sigma 6 was.
Yeah.
But, while it was happening, I mean, it was hated to the ends of the earth. So, it wouldn't surprise me if the Collectors Club kind of wanted to stay away from that and not risk anger or hatred. But it certainly seemed to me like it was a good chance or an opportunity for them to do something a little bit different. But again, the club also has been very vocal about their statement that they don't want to do core characters over and over again. So you can't really do Sigma 6 without Duke and Snake Eyes and kind of the same old folks over and over again. And we know the club really wasn't a fan of doing that. So that probably more than anything, got them to stay away from it.
I would have loved a Zartan in that, that kind of one with all the crazy kind of he's got like see-through parts in some like transparent.
There was a later wave Zartan, the toxic Zartan.
Yes, that was it.
Kind of transparent green stuff going on, which was pretty cool.
But anywho,
I do have one more thing I thought was worth mentioning about this Jinx. So at the time this figure was
we're talking about Sigma 6, Adam. Come on.
No, that's dead and gone now. At the time that this Jinx figure was shown, I think that it had a lot of excitement for the fandom because it was the first modern era Jinx figure and I believe the first Jinx figure at that point in over a decade. But by the time it was released, we had 4 Jinx figures in that year. So I think all of which were, in my opinion, superior to this one. And so I think that really kind of stole a lot of the thunder that this would have had otherwise.
Took the shine off it, didn't it? Especially it was with those 2 SDCC releases, right? The kind of white and the red Jinx.
Yeah, and then the Retaliation yellow one.
Of course, yeah. Which was basically Helix. It wasn't, but...
Now that you mention that too, Adam, I do remember kind of when they showed first images of this Jinx, I think there was a lot of outcry from the fans saying, wait a minute, we're finally getting a modern Jinx and it's not even based on the old version. So that might have kind of lent to their choices to go more vintage in future waves too, perhaps. They thought there was a little bit too much resistance to that kind of idea.
Yeah, definitely.
Well, anyway, let's crack on with Quarrel, and we're back with Adam again, who's stealing all the good stuff. But again, like you will get screwed when it comes around to the next batch. So take us through Quarrel, Adam, and be as kind as you can, please.
I'm gonna try.
This is an Action Force podcast, by the way.
Yeah, but with 2 Americans co-hosting. I was at JoeCon in 2011 when this figure was revealed, and to me at the time it was kind of uneventful, to be honest, because I have so in the 1992 convention, I think there was 4 Action Force figures that were polybagged and released under their American name. So this was before I even knew what Action Force was. I was familiar with that figure as Agent Scarlet because of the James D. Simone guides.
Right.
And so I did have some connection to this figure, but, especially during the 25th era, there was just such a glut of Cobra Commanders and Dukes and Baroness and Snake Eyes and Scarlet that I was like, another one, it didn't really, especially because, compared to the rest of this lineup, I'm such a fan of some of these figures, like Dice, for example, that this one just at the time felt, I've come to appreciate it more as the years have gone by, just because of obviously all the other Action Force characters that we've gotten since then. But out of these 3, this is certainly my least favorite of the 3 so far.
Justin.
Yeah, I really appreciate what they were trying to do because I was familiar with Action Force and really liked the idea of those different characters. But the 25th anniversary Scarlet was just, it was early on in the 25th line, and it was really not a good figure, especially if you looked back at it from 2013 and compared to what they had done, in the years since 2007 when the figure was first released. There was so many. This was a perfect opportunity, I would have thought, to kind of take the idea of Quarrel and update it and do something new and different. But this figure was just not a very good representation of her. So I don't think they did Quarrel justice. And I understand what they were trying to do, and I'm glad they did dip into the Action Force stuff, but just the style and the template they used for this particular figure was not a good choice.
Well, I kind of have to agree, honestly. The kind of unfortunate thing that we have as Action Force fans, the Action Force fans on the show, not you two, like me, is that you kind of have to really be hoping that when they do their repaint of what the the original was, effectively, because that's the club focused initially on, just on the real American hero repainted characters in 85 kind of time. So you can you just had to hope that there was a decent base figure that they were going to use. And kind of the only really time I've been really, really super happy other than, say, Big Ben, because he wasn't technically really Action Force. I mean, that was a G.I. Joe release, wasn't it, in 90? So, and that was with Gaucho, because Gung Ho was such like an amazing base figure that I was kind of like, oh, thank goodness we're getting a Gaucho. It's, you know, it kind of made up for some of the other kind of, I would say, faux pas. And obviously we'll get to a number of these like later on, but I like Quarrel, but I only like Quarrel in that she kind of completes that set now, you know, like as we're kind of looking now, we've got all of the kind of Action Force characters together, and, you know, she looks cool within that group, but as a standalone figure, just a repaint of Scarlet, it's just it's one of those kick in the nut kind of moments with Action Force fans who, let's face it, we were very happy and we were very grateful when these characters were being revealed, but on the kind of, when you look back, you kind of think, oh, you know, this build could have been a little bit better, and that could have been a bit better. And obviously we'll get to those figures later on in these series. And let's, you know, in the case of time, let's just go through you guys and see who wins this bracket. So Adam, first off, who has won this for you? I think I know the answer.
Yeah, I mean, it is a little bit tough, but it's got to go to Dice for me.
Dice. So Adam says Dice, and Justin.
It's close for me, but I do give the edge to Jinx just because of some of the modern elements the club was able to weave into the figure.
Which means I have the deciding vote, and I'm going to drag this out a little bit. What I should do is go with Quarrel being full force, and then be like, oh, we've got a tiebreaker now. But I'm actually going to give it to Dice. I'm sorry, Justin. And this isn't just because I fancy Adam more than you.
Yes.
It's not because I do fancy you more. It's honestly to do with the head, and the head on Jinx just looks so small. I just don't think it really kind of works. Plus, I'm tied to that vintage. You know, when it comes, and again, like as you said, like, you know, they're not just going, the club aren't just going back to the vintage. They're going back to, like, I just see vintage as everything before the 25th, and in actual fact, they're going to be like doing 20. You know, we've already had like better versions of some characters that are in the 25th, so you could almost argue that it's anything. I'm not going to get into that, but yes, I'm going with Jinx. I'm going with Dice. And
everything before Rise of Cobra is vintage.
Exactly. And Dice gets through to the next round. Okay, moving on. Still in round one, but now we have Nano Bat, Topside, and Big Boa. We'll start with Justin this time. Really try and screw Adam up and myself up with as much info as you can on the Nano Bat, please, Justin.
Yeah, sure. The Nano Bat, well, it was a canceled Rise of Cobra figure initially. We saw some concept art for the figure that was supposed to come, I believe, with Zap or something like that back in the Rise of Cobra days. Never ended up coming out, so the club elected to release it in the figure subscription service. And I'm not a huge fan of bats altogether.
Unless they're Sigma 6 bats.
Exactly, yeah. Sigma 6 bats are awesome. All other bats are terrible. Now, the modern era, like the 25th anniversary, they did really fantastic versions of the Bat figures. I prefer a little bit more humanity to my characters. I don't really like the faceless, nameless kind of automatons or whatever. But this figure is pretty striking. I mean, the translucent green parts are really cool. It looks neat. But I'm not really a huge Bat fanatic to begin with. So I don't give this one huge ratings. I think I gave it 3.5 stars with my original review, mostly because of the transparent green imagery, which looks pretty neat, but it really didn't feel like it had a specific place in my G.I. Joe collection, so to speak.
How dare you? Adam next. I'm gonna let Adam off by going last here, so he can get at least a few anecdotes in.
Can I just say how tough this round is? I mean, the last round was pretty easy for me, but I'm just looking at these and I'm like, man, they're all great.
I have to agree with that, yeah.
Yeah, so I think it was Gary Head, actually, that had first showed images of those canceled 2-packs. And, you know, some of them I was kind of take it or leave it on. Like, anything unreleased has a certain appeal to collectors, even if it's a pile of crap. Just because it was unreleased, there's like a mystique about it.
Oh yeah, totally.
But this one was one of those, like there was like a Budo in that set, for example, that I was like, you know, it's cool in theory, but the figure wasn't great. But this one, I remember seeing it and just being like, oh man, so cool, you know. And, like, and in fact, that one, I think was even opaque green. It wasn't even translucent. So
yeah,
when the club showed this one, I almost felt like they found a way to improve upon something that was already awesome. And it's funny because like I was just complaining before about how too many Scarlets and all this stuff, but like
there were like 500 bats.
And I'm not even a huge Bat fan necessarily, but this one, for some reason, the translucent green, I just love it. It really speaks to me, and this is going to be a very tough pick.
I have to kind of like, I think I sit in between these two thoughts processes here because Justin isn't a big fan. We've heard that. Adam, you're a super fan of it, and I'm not indifferent in any way, shape, or form. I'm probably pushing more to really, really liking it. I do like bats. I think that bat base body is freaking awesome. Like I think there's a reason it's been repainted over and over again. And for me, I just really love the color combination. And one of the reasons I love the color combination is because I went through a little phase of only buying basketball sneakers that were grey and neon green. So, on that alone, I love this bat. Anywho, yeah, this is a tough one because moving through, I just have to say that bat's beautiful. And also, Jodie Classified, talking Gary Goggleshead, they did a podcast, and they must have mentioned Nano Bat about 386 times in that podcast. But it was like a running joke for ages, wasn't it? Just kind of saying Nano Bat over and over again. But I just remember that really fondly, like listening to that and thinking, damn, Jodie Classified need to make more podcasts. And it just unfortunately never. We only got like a handful of episodes, I think, didn't we? But that would be great. I'm gonna get on. I'll get on to Pat and see if he can kind of do some more Jodie Classified stuff because that's really cool. But anyway, moving through to Topside, and again I have to say that this lineup is banging. But Justin, what do you think of Topside?
No, Topside was really great. I like that figure a lot. I think the 1990 era of G.I. Joe figures was very underappreciated.
Oh, yeah.
At the time that Topside came out, the club hadn't really explored that year very much, if at all. I don't remember really if they'd done a whole lot with it at all at that point. But, he had some really cool modern updates. The head sculpt was really nicely done. It had some decent accessories. It was just a very nice, solid, really cool, updated version of the Topside figure. And I ended up being a really, really big fan of that figure. It's one of those few figures that I actually appreciated the modern version. I don't know if I appreciated it more than that crazy vintage one with the yellow eyes, but it was... It was a close call.
Zombie Topside.
Jaundice Topside. 1990 was my introduction to G.I. Joe as a kid, and so I have a real built-in affinity for any of the characters from that year. But this one is a real mixed bag for me. I think the head sculpt on this figure is fantastic.
Beautiful.
It has so much personality, great detail.
They really pushed that at the club as well, didn't they? I'm sure they had like close-up pictures of that head and all sorts when they were promoting this.
Definitely. But then from the neck down, this figure is identical to Cutter and multiple Shipwreck figures, and that really hurt it for me. I mean, if he had a unique vest sculpt, or even if his build had come from a figure that wasn't already of such a similar specialty, like really anything to separate it. But as it is, I think he's a great figure, but I'm a little biased against him only because when I look at him, I have a hard time seeing past those previous figures.
Yeah, I kind of have. I don't know if it's like, I'm not just saying this to disagree with you, but I feel like I only see Topside. I think the colours for me really kind of push it through. The only thing I would say is give him his little was it like a rope belt he used to have?
Oh yeah.
That's missing.
I do think what you just said is worth definitely heaping some praise on the club for, though. They really, and not just here but throughout the whole FSS, they did a really great job of color matching to the vintage figures.
Yeah.
I mean that blue and orange on this figure is so distinct, and like you easily could have had it off and it would have ruined. I mean, like if I blur my eyes and look at this, I know like that's Topside. Like that color combo is so unique, but it's just the sculpt for me, and it's a great sculpt. It's just because of the reuse.
Sure,
makes sense.
I'm gonna have I mean, I've said my piece on Topside. I actually really love the vintage figure. This one, I again really love it. This one is a tough one because until I hear you talk about something like that, Adam, I don't really have a problem with Topside until you say that. And just as Justin was talking about the Nano Bat, I really like that figure, and then Justin spoke about it. I'm like, yeah, he's got a point. So this is going to be make or break, this one, I think, because of this guy, Big Boa.
So I think the big takeaway here is that you're very impressionable.
Very. If you just you can probably ask me to do anything and I'll do it, but don't.
I'll remember that.
So
In the future.
Big Boa, Justin.
Oh man, Big Boa was not just one of my favorite figures in FSS 1, but probably one of my favorite figures in any of the FSSs at all. I mean, he's not a figure without his faults. We did a little bit of talking kind of before the show, and Adam mentioned specifically a lot of parts that were painted on the modern version that were sculpted on the vintage version, which do look somewhat ridiculous on this modern version, but almost everything else about the figure just is amazing to me. I love the Resolute Roadblock kind of base build, and yeah, we've seen it used a ton of times since then, but I think they did a really, really good job with that large stature, and the head sculpt looks really decent. It's a decent update. It works better as a helmeted sculpt than some of the trying to repurpose some of the vintage stuff. I love the glove hands, and I know a lot of it was repurposed from some canceled Rise of Cobra figures as far as the padded helmet goes, and some of the pudgel stick and some of that stuff. But I mean, everything about the figure is really, really impressively well done. And it's the only FSS figure, to my knowledge, where we've actually gotten new web gear. It seemed like in the FSS, typically you had, some kind of throw-ins where figures that you kind of felt were just the club just kind of threw it together, and, money-saving figures. And then they would, really slam you with one or two really, really good releases in the FSS that really were eye-opening. Big Boa was one of them, and it used to be at one point, the 13th figure might have been another one, but they seemed like they kind of, there were some that might have been phoned in, but it was usually made okay by the fact that there were some really powerhouses in those series, and Big Boa was one of those figures for me where it was just an almost perfect modern update, and a really impressive figure that blended well with modern figures and managed to look really, really a lot like the vintage version as well. It kind of ticked all the right boxes. So yeah, definitely one of my most favorite FSS figures altogether, and certainly one of my favorite figures in FSS 1.
I know Adam's going to explain why it's not exactly perfect, though, aren't you, Adam?
Well, we'll start with the fact that he has sculpted nipples. No, I'm trying to be fair to these, and I'm trying to kind of look at this as both what were my opinions at the time we first saw these, and what are my opinions now with knowing what came later. And I'd be remiss if I didn't say that obviously the 50th Gung Ho is a much better muscular build, and so of course it could be better if you use those parts. But overall, I mean, just the amount of new tooling alone has to make this not only a top contender for this FSS, but for any of them. I mean, and like Justin said, a lot of those new accessories he came with were from that canceled training Duke from Rise of Cobra. But regardless, to this day, it's still the only time we've seen those pieces. So he really, for so many reasons, I mean, for all the accessories, for the stature of the figure, and plus, I think too, it's not as uncommon now that we're getting some of these, weirder Raptor and Crystal Ball and stuff. But in 2011, to have this figure announced, based on how much there was still left to do updates of, this seemed like such a win for the collectors that were into the kind of weirder, more obscure parts of G.I. Joe.
It's funny that you say that, because I think a lot of even the guys that are kind of not into that as such, Big Boa gets a pass in a way because of the kind of the specialty. So he's just training, so he can pretty much get away with looking mental with a friggin' helmet on and all that kind of stuff. But something you mentioned as well, Adam, about the whole thing of using the different body. Are you surprised that, or are you not surprised that the club decided to go with the same body for Kangor?
I had thought about that, and I'm sure when a million years from now, when we get to that, we'll delve into it. But but yeah, I do think that would have been a cool way to separate the two figures a little more. But I also think that part of the choice behind doing Kangor was because, of course, Big Boa has become such a valuable figure on the secondary market that they wanted to give people a chance to get something as close to the original version as they could.
Yeah, that makes sense. With all that said, guys, because this is such a difficult round, let's eliminate our least favourite, if that's even possible. Justin, what was your third out of this lot?
I'm probably going to say Nano Bat, even though Adam's going to kick me in the nuts next time he sees me.
Adam, what about yourself?
It's got to be Topside, unfortunately.
Okay, so I have to go with... Oh, goodness. This is difficult because I do like Topside and Bat. But I'm going to say I like the Bat more on this particular one. So Topside gets my third. So Topside is eliminated, which means that it is between Big Boa and the Battle Android, the Nano Bat, and I think I know what's going to win now. Justin, what about yourself, mate? Who are you going to give the number 1 to?
Big Boa, definitely.
And Adam?
This hurts. I love you, Nano Bat. I'm sorry. Big Boa all the way.
I'm also going to give it to Big Boa. It's a sweep, unfortunately, but Big Boa goes through to face.
He delivers
Dice.
the knockout jab.
He'll face Dice later on in the show. I say later on in the show because we've still got a ton more rounds to do. So, moving on. The third game in round 1 belongs to Surefire, Iron Claw, and Covergirl. I'm going to take this one first, and let's start with Surefire. So, I have to admit that when this character was revealed for the FSS, I was a little bit kind of like, do I remember Surefire? I'd almost basically missed most of the middle bit, I call it, of the the bit after 94, going into this time period. It was a little bit loose until James Kavanagh started doing books about them. So until I kind of had that kind of knowledge at hand, really, I just wasn't really aware of the character. I wasn't really aware of anything about it. So, kind of to get this basically David Lane action figure, which is what it was.
I think you'd probably like the figure a lot better before you knew what the character was.
But and the funny thing is, I like the overall look of the figure. I think the figure's cool. Now, am I right in saying that David Lane was actually attached to this figure, not originally, but the version prior to this one?
The first Surefire came out in, I think, 2001, 2002 with the Real American Hero collection, and even back then it wasn't so obvious, but his real name was David Lane.
Yeah.
In the file card even back then. So.
And obviously David Lane was the Steel Brigade fan club, effectively, so that's why he was attached to this particular action figure. So the club obviously, did it again, brought it out in the FSS 1, homaging David again, and I must admit I like the figure. I think it's a pretty solid figure. The secondary kind of does muddy it a little bit, it kind of does cover a lot of the figure to the point where it really kind of overpowers it, but at the same time I do like the color deck. I like the deco. I like the build is fairly solid, but in terms of in general, if we're talking like FSS 1, I wouldn't have put it down as one of the figures that needed doing from the get-go. But I suppose it does also kind of get it out of the way a little bit. And maybe, obviously, David probably had a bit more creative control at this stage in choosing what things went through. Yeah, probably. What about you, Justin? How do you feel about Surefire?
When Surefire first came out, and like I said, in 2001, 2002, in that general area, it had been a long time since we actually got a new character in the G.I. Joe mythology, so I really was attached to the character. I thought it was really interesting, kind of new law enforcement kind of angle. So I really enjoyed the character back then, and he became kind of an important part of my Dial stories and my G.I. Joe universe and what have you.
Stop pushing your own stuff, God.
That being said, I'm not sure if anybody was really clamoring for a modern update of Surefire, especially before a lot of other characters got made, and especially since the figure is essentially more or less, a little bit different, but it's very similar to 30th Anniversary Law. Yeah. So, it's not like it's bringing a whole lot of new, exciting things to the table besides, the Dave Lane goatee. So I mean, it was fine. As a figure itself, it's a great figure. It used the 30th Anniversary Law base body with, I think, the Resolute Duke legs or something like that. So it was, great articulation, great sculpting, a really nice overall figure, just not one that I necessarily think needed to take up a spot in the FSS.
When FSS 1 was first announced, obviously at that time we had no idea that there would one day be an FSS 8 or a Final 12 or whatever. So at that time, I remember thinking, these are the first single card figures that the club is producing, and Surefire. Obviously it now in hindsight, bajillion figures later, no worries. He's just one of many. But at the time, it kind of felt like, why are we doing this here and now? And we know the answer. Who at the time I didn't know, so obviously I appreciate that homage a little more now, of course. Like Justin said, this figure is so similar to the 30th Law, which by the time we actually got this figure in hand, which I believe was sometime in early 2013, it didn't matter as much. But at the time that it was first shown, we had just gotten that Law figure, and I was like, oh, again, like the reuse is often a killer in G.I. Joe, not just in the FSS, but across the board, and mixing and matching and stuff is really the way to get around that.
Shock Trooper.
Yeah, Shock Trooper. Ugh. And so he definitely suffered from that a little bit at the time, but this is the fun thing about looking at these now is with some hindsight, I actually really like this figure. I think the color combo is really cool, and we haven't seen that secondary anywhere else since then. So that was it stands out a little more now as being pretty unique. One thing to mention about this figure is we've got our first of 2 paint blunders. Ding ding ding. He is missing the paint on his right arm's lower sleeve cuff.
Yeah, like the sleeve cuff.
Yeah, and all of them suffered from that. So that was I know a lot of people at the time were all in a huff over that.
What? So you don't have interior flesh colored T-shirts?
Well, if you look at David Lane, you'll notice he has this just giant bulbous flesh band that goes around his arm, and they modeled that.
Next time I see David, I'm going to be like, David, I want to take your shirt off. I need to see your bulbous flesh ring.
That's totally a joke, by the way. I mean, for anyone that doesn't catch
he doesn't really have a bulbous flesh ring
that we know of.
That we know
of. It's not on his arm.
I've seen it. It's beautiful. It's kind of like when all the Cobra guys get taken to Cobra La for the first time in that flying giant vagina fish. It's it's very similar to that. Anyway, I want to talk about.
Probably move on. This is going weird places.
I'm definitely keeping that in. Iron Claw. So I have all sorts of love for this guy. One, it was brilliant that they went into an era so not expected by a lot of people, I think, from the off too. So for FSS 1, and boom, we're kind of getting a bit of fan service in, as we said, kind of like Action Force has been dropped in there. This kind of like homage to David Lane's been thrown in there. And now we've got Iron Claw, who is just bonkers, and I kind of love him for it. I think that he is just all over the place, and I absolutely adore it as a figure. I think none of it should work, and yet it does for me. Like, none of that should actually make sense. You've got, like, as I mentioned, because we did this, we covered Iron Claw in the FSS card art battle, and it was the same kind of thing. When you look at him, you just think, okay, so black, purple, red, yellow, chrome, and then maybe some other colour in there that I can't see. Maybe a bit of gold as well. Really? That was, it's just awesome. I loved that. So I would have to say that this one for me is one that might break through on just bonkers, just insanity alone. And again, like covering an era of G.I. Joe that I don't think any people were expecting to even be looked at, let alone straight off the bat, here's Iron Claw. Adam, what do you think about that?
Beautiful chaos, the Iron Claw story. Yeah, I really liked G.I. Joe Extreme. Not, obviously, some of the sculpts are impractical. I mean, of course, like, they don't stand up great. They're in these static poses. But I thought the designs of a lot of the characters were really good. And so I was so happy to see that finally translated to a 3 3/4 inch figure, because I think a lot of the things that people have against Extreme, if they really analyze them, like I said, it's not the figures, it's the posing and the builds. And so to finally get to see that design but implemented on a figure like this really brought it to life. And I think a lot of these figures, I think Iron Claw and Big Boa, if I'm not mistaken, were actually canceled Hasbro comic 2-packs, I believe.
Yep.
And so, yeah, I mean, you can tell that they were really, and also they were done at the time that the whatever we want to call it, 25th or modern era tooling was really starting to kind of hit its stride.
Yeah.
So the sculpting was just really top notch. And this is one of those cases too, where like the legs were reused from Destro, but like it doesn't bother me at all. It worked perfectly.
Yeah, it works for his kind of character, doesn't it?
Yeah, and just everything. The build is really solid. Like, it doesn't have any proportional issues. Like you said, the colors are totally crazy, but it just works. I just love this figure. I could keep rambling forever.
I suppose you could. Justin just sent us a picture on the message thing to show the comparison, because he's showing off. Just kidding. But there's a couple of things I would have absolutely adored them to kind of include. Obviously, a little bit more color matching with the red elements to kind of more kind of like that murky brown color. But then also, the tassely kind of things that come off the back of his either beret or head. I mean,
his Ninja Turtles bandana.
Exactly. I would have loved if they'd have gone, you know what, we're going to go balls out and actually make that as well. But to be honest, I mean, the secondary itself with the skull on the shoulder and the kind of other arm, kind of prickly arm guard on the other side, just f***ing unbelievable. I think this is a real bang up job of kind of making what is absolutely ridiculous a little bit more practical, and yet it still maintains that insanity.
Yeah, I mean, I agree with both of you. I mean, the G.I. Joe Extreme, I loved the cartoon. The figures, obviously, they had some certain wacky 90s appeal, but weren't really functional in any sort of way. And I was really excited when the club dipped into G.I. Joe Extreme, and it was based off of, I think there was going to be a Crimson Guard trooper and Iron Claw trooper kind of thing where they were trying to tie Iron Claw into Cobra a little bit. That was one of the canceled 2-packs that never came out, and I think they probably used some of those parts with this. But I mean, it, like you said, it's just so crazy. It really should not work. This big silver skull kind of sticking off the end of this guy's purple web belt.
Oh, right, okay.
And it's so insane that it works, and it's a great modern update. He looks really, really cool, really imposing. The 25th anniversary Destro parts that they use work really well. It's kind of a dictator sort of European look. And
oh yeah, we all rock that. We all look like that.
Oh yeah, all you dudes from Europe have those thigh high boots and skulls on your shoulder.
Yeah, if you're a stripper, yeah.
But no, he was really fantastic. Conceptually, I thought it was done really well, and they actually executed it fairly well too. So he's definitely a highlight.
Okay, let's discuss. I mean, I think we're all kind of in the fan with Iron Claw there. Let's discuss Covergirl quickly. Now, again, like I kind of think like this was a really good interpretation of Covergirl, except for I wasn't quite a massive fan of the hair colour. Don't get me wrong, I like orange hair, but in terms of the vintage version, I kind of wanted it to be more like that. And also, they're kind of like, I don't know, almost separate. Well, you kind of want you want that separation between Covergirl J and Scarlet. Kind of how they did it back in the day with Lady J was like the kind of classic brunette. Scarlet was the redhead, and Covergirl was like somewhere in between, but she wasn't the same. And I kind of feel like they've tried to do that here, but what's happened is I don't think it works with the kind of colour. And it's really the only problem I have with the figure, because everything else I think is amazing. I think she's a fantastic build. I love the jacket. I think that's just, which is only obviously just a half jacket and the arms stick out, obviously, but I do love that about her too. But you could also argue that at the same time, was there a need for another Covergirl at this point? I don't think there was.
Well, I mean, I guess the short answer to was there a need for another Covergirl is probably yes, because the only modern era one we had at that time was the Rise of Cobra movie one, which was based on an actress and didn't really look like what most people consider Covergirl. But I'm kind of in agreement with you. I think this is an okay figure, but I really am not. This is going to lose me some fans, but I kind of have the you snooze, you lose mentality when it comes to figures. And I feel like a big part of the whole reason this one exists is because the 2011 convention Sparta figure so many people missed out on and wanted. And, again, to go back to the same problem.
That's the kicker, isn't it? The Sparta figure.
Yeah, well, and to go back to the same thing with the retooled head with Jinx, this head originally came from the Agent Courtney Krieger figure from 2006. Yeah. And so I do think that this head is much more effective than the the Jinx head, but it still just feels a little bit off to me. And don't get me wrong, this is a really good figure. I mean, this would have done just as well on a 25th card at retail. I mean, I don't really have any complaints about it, but you can tell that the head something is just a hair off.
Lols, no pun intended.
Yeah. But just I think again, it's just like so many of the figures in FSS 1 for me suffered from the fact that they were shown right after we had basically just gotten the same thing. And that FSS 1 was announced at the same convention that Sparta came from.
Yeah.
So at the time it felt like a little bit of overkill. Now, with some hindsight again looking at it, I think that this figure time has been kind to it. I actually like it more now than I did then, but it's definitely not going to be winning this round for me. Spoiler.
Yeah, I mean, I kind of agree with pretty much everything Adam said as far as the 2006 head sculpt really does not do the figure any favors. And like you said, it's not as bad as the Jinx one, but it still is not fantastic. I also kind of, they wanted to pick elements from the Sunbow version who had long blonde hair, but they wanted to pick inspiration from the toy version, and they didn't really do either one spectacularly well. So, just not a great representation of Covergirl. And for those folks who did have Sparta, she was, almost, even like the tan color matching is somewhat close to what Sparta looked like. I mean, it's an almost reproduction of that Sparta figure with just the coat from the 2006 Covergirl thrown on the top of it. So, it felt to me like the club was trying to please an element of the fandom that didn't get their hands on a Sparta figure. Trying to do, a pretty, fairly important character who had not yet been done. So they were trying to kind of tick off those check boxes here in FSS 1, and the end result was fair. It wasn't bad. It wasn't great. It wasn't terrible, but it was just kind of there.
I have to reiterate as well, the head sculpt, I don't think there's anything wrong with it. I think it looks really good.
No.
But I think it's the colour of the hair that really does separate it from the rest of the body. Like, it really makes it obvious. It's almost like not part of this. Do you know what I mean? It's almost like two separate things coming together. Yes, it works in a silhouette scenario, but I think the colour doesn't really jive well. So, you jive turkeys. So I am going to have to say that, again, like, I didn't think this was going to be a hard round for me, but I think Covergirl is my... I don't want to say she's my least favourite because I really like her, but I think Surefire edges her out for me as my least favourite, and that should give you a spoiler as to who I think my favourite is. What about you, Adam? What's your least favourite?
Probably Surefire.
Okay, and what about you, Justin?
Yeah, I'd say Surefire wins by a hair for my least favourite of the
No
three,
pun intended. Which means that Ironclaw and Covergirl will go head-to-head now. So, again, Adam, who are you giving it to?
I think I'm just going to have to give the narrow edge by 10 football fields to Ironclaw!
Justin?
Ironclaw, definitely.
And I'm saying Ironclaw again to be with the cool kids.
Iron sharpens iron! On to the next round!
And finally, for round one, I should say, we have Grunt, Barrel Roll, and Theodore N. Thomas, or TNT. So, Adam, let's come back to you on this one.
It's going to be brutal.
It is.
Save the best for last.
I did, yeah.
Remember how round two we were having a hard time picking this is the opposite.
Yeah, which of these stinkers are you going with, Adam? No, take us through Grunt, Adam.
Also, Chris, I just want to tell you I'm proud of you for not calling him Grunt, for not calling Grunt Grundle, because I saw it coming like a mile away.
Gruntle.
Yeah, there you go.
I might call him Grundle when I talk about him.
I'm sorry, did I steal an upcoming joke? Yeah, Grunt. So I think that this figure is where the problem with the completionist mentality comes in. You have these people, and you've already admitted to being one of them, that wants every single figure from 82 to 94 redone in modern era. And to me, there's just some times where I'm like, we have Grunt. We don't need him in tan. Like, he's not, and...
Or at least there's another way you can get a tan Grunt. Like, it doesn't have to be in something that's so, like, with the FSS, that the nature of FSS screams to me that these things should be, like, the highly sought after things. And then you could probably get tan Grunt as a friggin' convention exclusive. Or, like, an attendee exclusive. Something that isn't as impactful.
I mean, it's a mixed bag, because obviously G.I. Joe at this time was still really thriving at retail, and you would think, well, maybe he could have been good as a vehicle driver, a pack-in and a multi-pack or something. Yeah. But then at the same time, I'm like, but I think the FSS is for the most hardcore, dedicated G.I. Joe fans, and so those are probably that's probably about the audience size that would really clamor for a figure like this. So I'm kind of torn on him. I mean, to me, he just fills a spot in a collection. I have no real personal affinity for this figure. And also, we'll go ahead and point out paint blemish number 2. Half the grunts that shipped have a flesh-colored neck, and the other half do not, which doesn't really make that big of a difference because his flesh color isn't all that different from his tan bodysuit, which makes him appear naked when you blur your eyes. But
and now I've got an erection.
But yeah, I don't know. Grunt he's just Grunt.
Yeah, I mean, I agree 100% with everything. I mean, there are some figures that we really don't need modern versions of, in spite of what many of the fans would have you believe. And this is that exact, this is what that kind of mentality gets you, is that, we must have a, modern version of every single figure. Okay, well, you get the warts and all, and this version of Grunt really was not necessary. And I feel, it's just kind of a bummer that you take. I mean, and like Adam said before, we get eight FSSs. There's tons of figures, so one spot taken up, no big deal. But at the same time, we look back on 8 different series of FSS figures and the final 12, and you can still come up with some figures, like Lightfoot or some figures like that seem like they still deserved a place in the FSS. And
you're just going to make me cry now, aren't you? You're just going to make me cry on live podcast.
So yeah, I just there was really no need, and even so, the figure itself wasn't all that well done. I mean, they chose, they gave him this big, huge honking machine gun with shotgun that originally came with the new sculpt figures that, was too big for them. It's certainly too big for this Grunt, and came with a flying squirrel backpack, which was supposed to mimic the Falcon glider, but the paint didn't even match. And it was not a fun figure at all.
Yeah, let's move on from Grundle, because
we're all sounding very disgruntled.
Very disgruntled. Totally. Let's talk about Grundle roll next. I mean, barrel roll.
This one, I remember feeling this way at the time, and I still feel this way now when I look at him. Well, aside from thinking that he's got the coloring of a Reese's peanut butter cup, I just look at him and I'm like, this is practically the same figure as Grunt. Like the colors. I mean, I know it's not, but the colors is so similar. And I don't remember. They might have even shipped together. It's just at the time I was like, I don't know. It felt so bland to me. And also, again, with you only had so many spots, and at the time we didn't know how long this was going to go on. Barrel Roll had already had 3 figures at this point in 2003, 2004, and 2005.
Yeah.
And that was, I wouldn't say a low point for G.I. Joe, but certainly for the adult collector base, a point of lower interest. And so I think that this figure just felt like a little bit of a left field choice at that time. Of all the eras you could have. And I do think, for people that aren't aware of this, the club does have limitations put on them by Hasbro as to what characters they were allowed to use, especially at this point, because Hasbro was still actively churning out a lot of retail product. So it wasn't like they could just put out A-list characters whenever they wanted. But even still, I mean, I would have probably thought of, hundreds of figures I would have done before Barrel Roll at this point in time. I do appreciate that FSS 1 especially, it seems like they really tried to pull from a diverse range of eras.
Yeah.
And I think that's really cool. I mean, it's funny, at the time, I remember not thinking FSS 1 was such a great lineup. And when I look at it now, I'm like, it's actually extremely well balanced. Like, they really catered to a very wide section of the fandom. But that said, this figure just kind of boring and bland. And yeah, like you said, that helmet.
I know. The helmet for me is what really throws it off, because when you take that helmet off, the figure doesn't look too bad. There's that kind of weird paunch that the kind of the front parachute kind of really kind of throws off a little bit. But that helmet, it just looks like, I don't know, it's almost like they're going back to kind of like the Palatoy Baron Ironblood squidgy plastic friggin' coal bucket kind of style, and it's like, I just don't like the way it fits. I don't like the way it looks. I think it looks ridiculous. I think his proportions are a little bit all over the place. Like, he's got these kind of long, skinny legs, and then this really fat, paunchy stomach that is really just because of the parachute. And also, I don't know, I'm just not a massive fan. And the head does look a bit small, which is funny because the helmet's so massive. Because when you put it on, it sprays out. So it has this really awkward look to it. So yeah, I'm not a massive fan. And I think I was reading the comics at the time, and Barrel Roll was quite an important character in the Image comics. I'm not sure if it was at the time or it was just prior to that, possibly. It was probably a lot prior to that. But I was kind of, I don't know, actually, it probably would have been in some of the later Devil's Due issues. But anyway, like I kind of remember thinking, oh yeah, Barrel Roll, you know, being like au fait with the character and knowing the name and all this kind of stuff and knowing what he looked like. And then it came out and I was kind of like, oh right, I see. And I don't know, you're right, it has that, him and Grunt just have that whole beige thing going on, and it's really, really bland.
Well, and they both came with flight packs too.
It just seemed to me like pick one or the other, go with that, and then fill the space with a different repaint that might be quite interesting.
Yeah, I mean, I really liked Barrel Roll a lot when he first came out in 2005 or 2003, I think, with Spy Troops, and I thought the whole Stahl brother storyline brought a really neat element to the G.I. Joe universe. And the fact that they went with, you know, a repurposed version of, you know, the crappy New Sculpt Barrel Roll, or the crappy kind of, you know, direct-to-consumer Barrel Roll over the color scheme and the kind of the deco of the original, I really did not get that at all. I didn't know what they were getting at. And I, you know, part of me thought,
considering you've got Tan Grunt on the other side.
Exactly.
Like, yeah.
And considering, you know, and here's another perfect example of kind of, you know, you think they had plenty of opportunities to do whatever you wanted in the FSS. Well, we never did get a normal gray and blue version of Barrel Roll, which you know, much would have rather seen in this spot rather than the updated version of the tan update.
That'll be the Mystery 13th in FSS 7.
Yeah, and that helmet, like you said, that helmet was just awful. I mean, I don't know what they were thinking of in doing that, and it took a character that I really, really liked
and did a on it.
Yeah, exactly. Pretty much said, you know, this is what you're getting, and yeah, it was not very good at all.
Okay, well, let's move through to TNT, or Theodore N. Thomas. So, Adam, take us through TNT, please.
At the time that this figure was first announced, we had gotten Blowtorch in 2009. We'd gotten Blowtorch in 2011, and at the 2011 JoeCon, they had shown that they were going to be releasing the green and tan Blowtorch. Now, that didn't end up happening for a few years, but at that time, before we even had this figure in hand, within the previous 2 years, we thought we were having 3 versions of it, and so I was just like, oh my god, again, you know?
Yeah.
By the time we actually got it, I think that the color scheme is so cool, and the fact that he has he does have a different head sculpt, I believe, from Blowtorch, right?
Yes.
Yeah. So I think that really gave him a lot of his own personality, and I actually am really fond of this figure. I think he's very cool looking, but at the time that it was shown, I had real mixed feelings on it. But this is kind of similar to like Iron Claw, like the blue, yellow, and silver you think wouldn't really work, but it really does. Like, this is a very cool looking figure in hand. He almost kind of reminds me of like Lego pieces or something.
Yeah, like to me it really screams like Centurions, but then Blowtorch always really did scream Centurions to me because of all like those circular kind of designs on all of the kind of pieces of armor that he has. I have to say that I really love when they do full-on repaint international homages. I love it when they do ones that completely take you away from that original character, and that's what I think TNT does. I think that the different head and the crazy different coloring. I say crazy different. There's still yellow involved, but you know.
I think he has the same head.
Oh, does he? Okay.
I'm pretty sure. Yeah.
Well, even
well, that just shows you that people like brunettes better than redheads.
There you go.
Well, I must admit though, in the same vein, I think that the deco does so much to separate him from Blowtorch for me. And I just love the fact that they went so deep with an Argentinian desactivador de bombas. I just think that was, and you get that for free, people. I just really love the fact they went with that version of the character. And you see, when repaints are going to be done, I think it should be like the furthest away from that character. So in the case, and we'll come to it eventually, but Kangor. Spoiler alert, I'm not a massive fan of what they've done because it's effectively just the same thing. You know, there's very little has changed. So I just, this is what I really love about the FSS when they do this kind of stuff. And also it's the bonus that it's an homage to an international figure, much like they did with DJ and Coruscant. Like that color difference is just brilliant, and it like you look at that figure and you're like, yeah, this is not the same figure. So I really, really enjoy that. Justin, what about you on TNT?
I mean, by and large, I really didn't like the 25th anniversary update of Blowtorch. Not to mention the fact that we got it
706 times. Yeah.
But just the updated sculpting and everything was great, but it restricted movement so much that it just made using him very, very difficult. That being said, I agree with you. The color scheme for TNT was so striking and so kind of just looked like a very clean figure. The silver was very metallic, very shiny. The yellow and blue combination just looked really, really nice. So, I mean, I think that forgives a lot of it for me. I do like that they kind of gave him some more interesting accessories. That old Firefly kind of bomb disposal kit instead of the typical flamethrower and stuff like that. Was just really
Sorry. I'd like to stop you there, Justin, just for 2 seconds while you explain yourself. I want you to explain yourself.
Adam, you son of a...
someone. Okay, Justin has just been telling us how he didn't like Blowtorch, yada yada yada, restricted movement. How many stars did you give Blowtorch?
Are you stopping the recording?
No. This is going out. I want people to know the discord between your words and your review.
We just want the people to know that the full force word is bond.
4.5 stars. I mean, I didn't give him 5 stars for Christ's sake.
I'm actually, to be honest, Adam, that is a really bad review from Justin.
Yeah, I'm pretty ashamed of that now that I'm looking at that. I never would have guessed that I gave him 4.5. I'm trying to rationalize it in my own head why I would have given him 4.5 stars.
You know what, Greg? Can we take a diversion? Honestly, I remember when I got Blowtorch. I'll never forget opening that figure and being like, this is really good. Like, compared to the 25th stuff at that time, I felt like there was a big leap that year. Well, that final assortment of 25th stuff, like, I think Blowtorch is a great figure. I mean, the Hasbro certainly exhausted us on him over the years, but
yeah,
he is a good figure.
And I must admit, though, like, for me, it's when you get something that's different. So if you had, like, when we got Gung Ho eventually, like the proper Gung Ho, it's like, oh, yes, thank for that. And it's like, it's one of those things that there's a lot of heft to it. It's just big and huge and awesome. And the thing with Blowtorch is that he's so different. It's not the same. It's not using similar parts, or it's not using, other things to kind of make the figure up. Like, this is like at that point, it was like a brand new, everything was new on it, new sculpt, everything looked really cool, and it was blocky and big and different. And that is going to have an effect on your decision making at that point, because it's like the whole time you've just been seeing similar parts reuse, or you've been seeing not the best kind of figures, or some of them are lacking somewhat. So I understand why you were at 4.5 there, but don't be giving me all that like like you didn't. But anyway, carry on, Justin. You were saying.
How am I supposed to talk rationally after being exposed here on National Full Force Podcast?
National Full Force Television. I just think it's funny. I think it's great. I think that is beautiful radio.
I'm honestly surprised. I don't recall giving the figure that glowing review, and I just read through it, and I'm like, oh my God, was I drunk when I wrote that or something? But I'll stand by it. Never mind. Blowtorch is great. TNT is fantastic. I love it. He wins.
Okay, I'm just going to come out and say it. This is an easy one for me. I'm not going to I'm not going to say what's our worst one, because Grunt and Barrel Roll can eat some. TNT. Dynamite. 333. He gets all of our votes. Let's move on.
Absolutely.
So, in actual fact, that means Iron Claw will face TNT in the next round. But before we do those, let's move on to the other round that we have to do first, based on playoff structure. Round 2. So now that round 1 is done and dusted, this becomes a quick fire round, as we have less to discuss here. But of course, guys, feel free to explain why you have chosen the figure you have. And this round is between Dice and Big Boa. So, Justin, who do you give the win to here, and why? Or just take us through your thoughts on these two figures in this particular scenario, and then tell us the winner.
Well, Big Boa, like I mentioned, is one of my favorite figures of the figure subscription service in total, and certainly one of my favorites in FSS 1. Just the combination of new parts, totally new parts with parts that we hadn't seen before, plus his larger stature and just the real awesome color matching of the vintage version. Just really shown a spotlight on Big Boa as a figure and a character that I really enjoyed. Dice was great too, and accomplished a lot of the same things, although not in quite the same way as Big Boa did. Back when Dice was released, I think as Adam said, there really wasn't any other Ninja Force figures, so it didn't feel necessarily at the time like you were filling an important spot in G.I. Joe history with Dice, even though it ended up being that way down the line. So it was a cool, interesting figure, not quite as dynamite as Big Boa in my opinion. So overall, between Dice and Big Boa, I give the edge to Big Boa.
And I can say, as you were talking, I was double checking what you gave them on generalschoice.com, and you completely you lined up perfectly, so it's fine. You gave 3 stars to Dice, and you gave 5 stars to Big Boa because you were obviously super erect at that point. So,
realizing going back right now and editing my review for Blowtorch.
You're going to give him 5, aren't you?
Negative 6 stars. I hate this.
So Big Boa gets chalks up the first hit on Dice. Yadam.
This is tough because, like I said, obviously I love Ninja Force, but I mean, if we're just gonna look at this for what it is, Big Boa is a better figure. I mean, it's obvious.
Okay, that's 2 really, then.
Yeah. Sorry, Dice. I mean, there's really not. Although I did think it would be a fun trick to play on the listeners to just have you completely replay my entire segment talking about both of them with and just confuse people. But now I'm just gonna cut right to the chase. It's obviously Big Boa.
I am pointless in this scenario. I don't get any casting vote, which I love having. But I would have also said Big Boa too, and it's really just because of the almost perfect transition from that original, the original depiction is just, so perfectly done. I just absolutely bloody love him. I think that helmet sculpt is just hilariously awesome. And the only way I think they could really improve on the figure in general, there are a number of things, obviously including the punch bag, the fact that you could probably use that heavier, heftier body now for the base figure. And the final thing I would say, just to be really nitpicky and ridiculous, would be to have that removable piping on, that removable mouth breather on the mask.
Speaking of the mouth breather, can anybody explain why it connects from one part of his helmet to another part of his helmet? What the point of that is?
Nobody knows.
He has a removable oxygen tank on the back of his helmet.
Again, there's no explanation for that, Justin. You've just ruined my life. No, seriously. I think would have been the only, things that I would change about it. But other than that, I love the fact they gave him little blue gloves on the hands, even though that wasn't on the original figure. I just like the fact he's got these almost like MMA gloves, like training gloves. I just think it's just a beautiful update. I'm going to use your awesome comparison images, Justin, so you're going to have to do a lot of work from FSS 5 onwards for the rest of for all the episodes.
I have to buy them first, I guess.
I'll just send you pictures.
All right.
Of just me playing with them that you can't have. Okay, so Big Boa enters the first of our 17 finals.
Knuckle up, homie.
So let's move on. The other not semi-final is between Iron Claw and TNT. So, Yadam, your turn to go first on this one. Who are you giving it to?
Well, as much as I just said that I really like TNT, he falls before the hand of the mighty Iron Claw.
Okay, so we've got Iron Claw. What about you, Justin? I did remember your name. I hadn't forgotten what your name was. I was being dramatic by leaving a little pause in there.
Well, as much as I've always loved the 25th anniversary Blowtorch figure,
I love how funny this has become. I think you and I should go for TNT, just to completely this game over. Could you imagine TNT winning this FSS 1? Like, that would be like Croatia winning the World Cup.
I think that would really damage our credibility to the listeners.
Whatever.
Yeah.
So who are you going? Go on then, Justin. Tell us all. Reveal all.
No, it's got to be Ironclaw.
It
Iron
really
Claw
has.
wins.
And I have to also back up that and say I would go with Ironclaw too, but only because I just love... It's fun. It's actually quite interesting that both the two most, I don't know, vibrant or most ridiculous have gone through and faced each other. I find that quite interesting. And I know Big Boa is probably more ridiculous, but I mean in terms of like the kind of like the colour choice and the character and all that kind of stuff. But actually what it means though is that the almost fake kind of final is between the two most ridiculous. So, round 3. This is more of a semi-final than a final due to the fact that the Mystery 13th will play the winner of this one. We have Big Boa versus Ironclaw. Justin, who are you going for?
This is a lot tougher than I thought it would be because, originally, Big Boa got 5 stars and Ironclaw, I think, got 4. And, but
sorry.
To be,
I'm just double checking that. No, I'm kidding.
To be honest with you, I kind of thought Big Boa would be a home run, but in looking back at Ironclaw, there's so much fun, ridiculous aspects to the character. It's kind of tough to overlook him, but that being said, I'm still going to lean towards Big Boa and give him the edge.
Big Boa takes the lead. 1. Adam.
This is so much harder than I thought it would be. Honestly, like I have the exact same opinion that Justin does. I really thought going into this that, Big Boa the end, but this is really tough. I mean, Ironclaw has aged remarkably well.
Big time.
If you look at some of the figures in this and you see proportional issues, you see deco issues, you see better parts choices. But I look at Ironclaw and I'm like, if you made that figure today, you'd be hard pressed to do it any better, really.
Yeah, because none of those parts exist anywhere else.
And it's never been reused. Proportionally, he looks great. And also, I feel like this figure kind of fires on all cylinders for a lot of reasons too, because people always talk about like how they want to mute the crazy colors and all this stuff, and like they did that. They took all the white parts and they made them silver metallic, and he still looks like Ironclaw, but he got reinvented just enough to kind of have a unique spin, so it doesn't just feel like a straight up redo of the extreme version.
Totally, yeah.
So this is really tough, honestly. I mean, I feel like I'm gonna have to give it to Big Boa just because I had that figure. I mean, I had both of them as a kid, but Big Boa just, for some reason, that figure really sticks out in my mind as being the winner then, and I feel like it should be now. And I don't want to like backslide on my my 10-year-old 4.5-star review, but I don't know. It's just.
Do you know what?
Damn.
Do you know what?
Ouch.
I'm surprised because I thought the way you were talking, I thought you were going to go with Ironclaw, and honestly, I'm going Ironclaw. And I was thinking, if Adam goes Ironclaw, holy shit, Ironclaw's going to take Big Boa out, but it hasn't actually come to fruition.
I just want to tell the listeners, though, it is so close. I mean, if you ask me this question 5 minutes later, the answer could be Ironclaw. I'm really torn, but I feel like it has to be Big Boa.
I think for many reasons, Big Boa should probably win this, but at the same time, Ironclaw for me is just... I liked him back then. I really liked the fact they introduced him. I really liked the figure when I got it in hand. And I love the figure now. I think more so. Like, it's almost like it's one of those ones where I've almost like put it down until recently. Like, I haven't really thought about him that much until we did the FSS card art battle with G.I. Joe Berg. And then it was like, Ironclaw, yeah, brilliant. And then looking at the figure again and just that comparison picture that Justin sent, which I'll flash up as well. I mean, God, he's just beautiful. I love him. So I'm going to go with Ironclaw, even though it's a fruitless vote.
I almost feel like to properly eulogize Ironclaw, we should really point out the fact that this figure has a unique head, a unique beret, unique bandolier, unique sword, claws, and pistol, none of which have been reused, which I'm pretty sure makes this the most, decked out, newly tooled figure in all of the FSS ever.
There you go.
And it's just, I mean... I'm almost talking myself into changing the vote, but
it's too late now. I've already locked it in via Photoshop.
All right, big Boa it is. Ride or die.
So that means that the actual final is round 4. Big Boa versus Blackout. So who will win out? Only we have the power to decide that. Unless you want to do a podcast about this, then go for it. Justin, who you got and why, yo?
Well, it's tough because, like I said, I really loved the whole Stahl Brothers angle, and I think, one of the few people that actually really thought the Blackout 13th figure was very well done, very nicely done, with the exception of the always repurposed 2003-4 era head sculpt, which looks downright awful here. But besides that, I really liked the kind of Resolute Zartan City Strike Snake Eyes build.
He doesn't scream evil to me. That
no,
face...
he does not.
That head sculpt is Will Ferrell with a flat top.
He's so chutchy looking. Like,
yeah.
He's so, you just want to squeeze his cheeks and go, oh, you're a little scamp, you.
Yeah. I think from the neck down, the figure is fantastic, but you get to that head and it just kind of eliminates any sort of foreboding or menace or anything like that.
It takes all the badassery out of that figure completely, doesn't it? It's like if Snake Eyes removed his head mask and it was Barney the dinosaur was underneath it. That's like all of the stuff that Snake Eyes has done would have just been eliminated because Barney the dinosaur would have been doing the whole thing. Just wants to be friends, but everyone's trying to kill him. Adam.
Well, I feel like I should talk about Blackout a little bit before he inevitably gets his Will Ferrell face knocked off by Big Boa's menacing glove. So, at the time that this figure was being anticipated, at some point, somehow, unfortunately the information leaked on forums that...
Was this when someone got the 13th before they should have got it and posted about it?
No, somewhere a list had turned up on one of these.
Something happened. Yeah, it wasn't the actual figure, but there was a list, I think, that emerged somewhere.
Which, I mean, and that is unfortunate because I hate to see that surprise ruined for anyone, including myself. In fact, even on the years where I've drawn the packaging art for the 13th figure, there's a part of me that's almost like, because like I anticipate that joy just as much as anyone else.
Yeah.
But I think that this FSS, had this come out, say 5 or 6 years earlier, when the Devils do run with the Stahl family storyline was really at its peak, I feel like this would have been much better appreciated. But I think by the time these came out, Real American Hero was already back with IDW, and I feel like the Devils do run had sort of, for better or worse, kind of been passed over a little bit.
Yeah. And
so I think a lot of the appeal of Barrel Roll and Blackout was sort of minimized because of that. The figure on his own, so obviously, I don't think the character held too much weight at that time, but the figure is pretty cool, actually. I think he's got a really nice futuristic build. The color scheme is cool. It was he's, I believe, only the second figure ever to come with Low Light's microscopic bullet accessory, which is pretty neat. I echo what you guys said. I think the head sculpt really hurt this figure, and it's again a case of the mid 2000s retooling just having very mixed results. I mean, there's times, like I said, like Darklon, where it was almost seamless, but in this case the head sculpt just felt very kind of flat and goofy for such an otherwise sort of badass, like armored figure. So
I agree. I totally agree.
I appreciate him for what he is, but against Big Boa, I'm afraid he just got those green goggles knocked right into his eye socket.
I have to agree. That Blackout figure is banging. Like the body's awesome. The choice of secondaries and all that kind of stuff. It's just really, really sweet. I think it's great. But that head, absolute grundles. So I'm going to have to say it's also a Big Boa from me. And Big Boa has swept it for the FSS Card Art Battle Episode 1, brought to you by the Full Force and GeneralsJoes.com. Guys, was this kind of was anticipated by me initially until we started talking about Iron Claw. And then it changed for me. Like I was like, I'm gonna get Iron Claw to the final if I have to kill people to do so. Did you have? It's a similar thing happened because you mentioned it. But any surprises here? I
think it's just, for more than anything, it reminded me how much I actually enjoyed this FSS, because I think when I think of them as a whole, and like I said, I've worked on a lot of them, so I do have biases. I can't help that, but I think that in my mind, this one had kind of fuzzed over because it was so long ago and it's the only one I didn't work on. But when I look at it now, a lot of these figures are so much better than I remembered, and they've really held up extremely well. And I can't help but wonder, especially in the case of Blackout, had they just shuffled the order a little, like had, say, Iron Claw or Nano Bat been the 13th figure, would that have created an extra appeal for that one, or would that have softened the blow for Blackout? And I think that's something interesting that we'll see come up in later FSS as well, is the order of what's 13th and what isn't. But I think the main thing is just that this set has held up a lot better than I remember it, and it was a lot harder to choose than I thought it would be.
Yeah, I agree with that 100%. I was a little surprised by the love for Nano Bat. I didn't realize there was kind of a segment of folks that really was enthusiastic about that particular figure. That was one surprise for me. But beyond that, especially with the exception of like Grunt and
you gave it
Barrel
6
Roll,
stars, Justin.
with the you guys are assholes. With the exception of
you've got
Grunt
this like
Roll.
8 more times minimum, by the way.
Yeah, what the hell did I get myself into? I'm gonna, as soon as we're done here, I'm gonna check every single review I've ever done.
I've already gone through and screenshotted every episode.
But yeah, with the exception of Grunt and Barrel Roll, the figures were a lot harder to choose than I thought. I also thought Big Boa would just kind of run away with the whole thing, but Ironclaw ended up coming a lot closer than I anticipated, and I actually liked Blackout. The Blackout's head sculpt detracted a lot more from the figure than I remembered originally.
Yeah.
So yeah, it was. But overall, what Adam said is true. For the first figure subscription service, it held up remarkably well. Considering the year it was released in 2013, I mean, here we are 5 years later, and there's still some really, really nice looking figures in there that have stood the test of time.
Totally. And I must say as well, all joking aside, I love your reviews. And when obviously back in the day when they were coming out, as the figures were coming out, I was
actually did them. Is that right?
Well, I almost said that. No, but seriously, as they were coming out and the figures were coming out, I was straight on there, like got to read this, got to check it out, even though I'd already got it in hand, or knew it was, I'd already bought it or whatever. It wasn't a case of I needed the review to tell me what was going on. I just enjoyed reading along with what you had to say about them. And I must admit, I find it very hard to find someone that can pose. Like you and Dave Proctor have got this knack of posing figures that I have never seen any other people kind of have that knack. It's incredible. And some of your pictures are brilliant, considering the amount of figures you can get into positions holding their guns just normally. And there's me for hours trying to fiddle with what would be a really well articulated figure just to get it to hold the gun right is just amazing. So big props on that, Justin. But yeah, and in any case, that is it for the first episode of the Full Force FSS Battle. Join us again soon, or in the next 7 months, for the second episode, where we will do the same to FSS 2.0. Thanks to my awesome co-hosts, Justin and Adam, and thanks to you all for watching/listening. Full Force.